So how much did you have to pay to leave Canada?
So my approximate exit tax is about $500,000 Canadian dollars.
This is Tim, an entrepreneur and YouTuber, as well as my friend who recently left Canada and moved to Dubai for lower taxes and a better life. And today I got the chance to interview him to ask him all sorts of juicy questions about why he left Canada, why he moved to Dubai specifically, his advice on living a location-independent life, and much more. He also shared a lot of details about the painful process of exiting Canada, including many things any Canadian considering leaving should be aware of, as well as some advice on how to avoid critical mistakes when moving to a different country like the UAE.
So Tim, welcome to the channel. First, can you just tell the people who you are?
Sure. So my name is Tim. Some of you may know me as Tech with Tim. I run a large YouTube channel where I teach software engineering and programming. And just a few months ago in January, I actually moved from Canada all the way to Dubai. And I think that's what you want to talk about here, right?
Correct, yeah. So if we just get straight to the meat of the interview, why did you decide to leave Canada?
Well, there's a lot of reasons I decided to leave Canada. Firstly, and I think most of you probably know, taxes in Canada, you get absolutely destroyed on taxes. It's actually criminal how much you have to pay. And I only realized that when I was actually trying to leave the country, and we can talk about that later, I had to pay a massive exit tax. But even just existing, not making a ton of money in Canada, you still just get absolutely destroyed. Also, the weather, the proximity to the rest of the world, the people, the crime, the cost of living. Overall, I just believe Canada is a sinking ship right now, and I thought, I need to get out as soon as possible because the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to be and the harder it's going to be to leave.
It's interesting because Canada is sort of the kind of country that usually people are like, that's like the promised land where everyone wants to go. Why do you think there is this perception that Canada is like a great country to move to, but then the reality, at least in your experience, doesn't match that? Or is it like the opposite of that?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I'm a proud Canadian. I don't like to shit on Canada all the time, but I think just in the past few years it's really gone downhill. People generally see Canadians as nice, friendly people, kind of more of like a Switzerland-esque country where it's very neutral. They don't get too involved in the wars and the politics. But just over the past few years, some of the corruption we've seen in our country, some of the insane rules and regulations, lack of freedoms during something like COVID, it's just really sinking. I wish I had a better answer for you, but all I can say is living in Canada over probably the past 6 or 7 years, I've only seen more negative things happen, the country really sliding downhill. And that's not just my perception, that's almost everyone I know that lives in Canada. It's harder to get a job, it's harder to afford housing, it just costs so much to actually live there, and your wages are not that high, especially considering they're in Canadian dollars, which is about 75 cents to the US dollar.
Yeah. With these kind of things, I think it's usually that perception sort of lags reality.
Yes.
Like Canada, US, UK, all these countries, they used to be the best countries objectively. Now, sure, they maybe are still for some people, for certain categories of people and things like this, but like all these things that are happening that are making the countries worse, like the perception from most people, especially the people who are not there, hasn't necessarily caught up with like what is actually happening.
Yeah, and I think Canada is also seen as like an immigration haven, right? A lot of people, it's relatively easy to move to Canada compared to other countries. And if you stay there long enough, you can actually qualify for the Canadian passport. So I do understand why a lot of people are immigrating to Canada. But what's funny is a lot of the people that are immigrating there now are coming into the country and realizing, hey, this isn't the dream that was sold to me. And they're actually leaving and going back to their home country. How crazy is that? People coming from developing nations, coming to Canada and saying, hey, you know what? I'd rather go back home than stay here because of how hard it is to actually make it in Canada now in 2024 and beyond.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Seriously.
Yeah. So you left Canada, and so can you just talk about a little bit about the process of what it was like? Because you've told this to me in private many times, and I'm always like, oh, like you had to go through so much. But just like a high level, what do you have to do? What was it like? You had to pay like an exit tax that was quite hefty and stuff. So talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it's craziness. So obviously there's two parts, right? The first part is, I guess, kind of getting set up in the UAE, and the other part is exiting Canada. And I'm still in the process of exiting Canada right now because it's just so complicated when you have a lot of businesses and companies set up. So if we start from going to the UAE side, this was actually relatively simple in comparison to leaving Canada. Setting up your free zone company, visas, all the stuff you've talked about on this channel a lot. I won't get into that because I think you have enough content on it. But in terms of leaving Canada, What you need to do first of all is you need to become non-tax resident, right? So that involves actually making sure you're a tax resident of another place. In my case, it's going to be UAE. And then you have to pay an exit tax. Now the exit tax is formally known as a deemed disposition. And what that really is an unrealized capital gain on anything that you own if you have assets that exceed $25,000. So in my case, I have multiple businesses in Canada. One a holding company, one an operational company, and I own shares of those companies. Even though it's my company, I'm never going to sell it, it has intrinsic value, and that value when I first acquired the share was say $1 or no dollars because it's a brand new company, and now it's worth $1 million or $2 million or whatever it's worth, and I have to pay a capital gains tax on that amount to the Canadian government. Their idea is, hey, if you're leaving Canada, we're going to deem anything you own to be disposed of at the fair market value, and you have to pay tax at that amount. So if you have a large unrealized capital gain, if you have additional properties in Canada, it's just very, very complicated. And you have to pay a ton of money, and there's all kinds of advanced accounting techniques and legal things you need to do. Now you pay your deemed disposition, that's great. Now you need to actually disband all of your different Canadian companies and start cutting your ties to the country. Canada is extremely aggressive when it comes to tax residency, and if you even keep a storage unit in Canada with something like a couch, that could tie you back to the country and force you to pay taxes even if you don't live there. So the rest of the process is getting rid of your Canadian driver's license, closing bank accounts, closing credit cards, selling properties or renting them out, and just making sure that you have no physical ties to Canada, and something like a kid, a wife, all of those, if they exist in Canada, are going to tie you back as a Canadian tax resident.
Well, this is what I always hear about Canada. It's like it's one of the most aggressive. Like there's all these things you need to consider, and if there's just one little tie, they're like, we're just going to tax you. A lot of other countries, like I left the UK, I left Finland, like they can be aggressive with like the tax rates, but at least they're somewhat simpler to leave. At least in my case was, I mean, obviously I had a simpler situation than you anyway, but with Canada, it seems like it's just like absolute, like you need to be like very on it with like lawyers and everything.
For sure. Just in legal expenses and accounting expenses, it cost me over $50,000 just to do this entire process. Now I have a more complicated situation than the average person, but like still, I'm not a multi-mega billionaire, and like it's still this long process, and it's not going to be for another year until I'm like fully out of Canada, because I have to close down companies, close down bank accounts, change payment addresses. Like it's just so much hassle and so much work. And the CRA, again, if you do one little thing wrong, they come after you and say, oh yeah, by the way, all this stuff you did doesn't matter. You still owe us tax.
Craziness, craziness. So you moved primarily to the UAE, like myself. Why did you decide specifically on the UAE and Dubai?
Yeah, so there's a few different reasons. The first, I think, is that I was aware of the UAE. I knew that you were there. I had other connections in the place. And it was logistically probably the simplest to go to out of a lot of the options I was looking at. Now, let me preface that with I was looking at zero tax countries or very low tax countries. That's the main primary reason I moved out of Canada. So obviously, UAE was up there on my list. When I started considering a lot of different places, I realized, you know what, UAE is kind of the safest. It's the easiest to go to. I know the process, it's fairly straightforward, and I'm certain I'll actually be able to get into the country, get everything set up. Beyond that, proximity to the rest of the world, being really close to Asia, close to Europe, and even that time zone, it's not the best for working with people in the US, but it's okay, and you can still do like a late night meeting, and you're not gonna be up at 2 in the morning if you're living in a place like Singapore. So to me, it just checked all of the boxes, and it was the place I could go to the fastest and just kind of get set up and get out of Canada really quickly.
Yeah, that's what I often talk about in terms of Dubai. Like, it just makes sense for a lot of reasons. Yeah. They make the process easy, obviously no tax, and you have a great modern city. All this is sort of in the center of the world, and that's why I find a lot of people move there. It's not the only option, that's what I always say. It's like there's many options, but for many reasons, for entrepreneurs especially, it just seems to make a lot of sense, and it's very easy, and it's like the sort of obvious option unless you have a specific reason why you want to go somewhere else. So it sounds like it's very similar to that. So you're talking about the process of exiting Canada. What was it like for you to move to the other side of the world? Like, not necessarily like even the process, but was it scary for you to leave? I know you lived in Canada your entire life, like this entire thing. What were some of the things that were going through your mind when you were thinking about leaving Canada and like moving pretty much to the opposite side of the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say it was scary to me. If anything, it was kind of exciting. From the time I decided like I'm going to the UAE, I was more just like, can I get there like tomorrow? Can I be there like right away? I just didn't want anything to do with Canada. And the reason this even came up is that I spent a few months traveling around Asia. I did a bunch of work. I was in countries like Singapore, Thailand, etc. And when I was there, I'm like, there's so many other places I can live. There's so many different options. I did a trip to Dubai where I met you there. I'm like, you know what, I need to get out of here as soon as possible. I can't spend, you know, another year of my life living in Canada and kind of drowning in the taxes and all of that. So for me, the first step was just doing a ton of research, talking to people like you that were already set up that I knew there, and just trying to find as much information as I possibly can. As you know, and probably many other people, if they've looked up Dubai, there's just so much information and so much of it is wrong or outdated. So that was a little bit stressful, trying to kind of seep through all of the different weeds and figure out, okay, what is actually the real process here? What do I need to do? What do I need to get set up? And then in terms of the Canadian side, obviously handling all of that. So if anything, I would say I was excited. I'd say it was a little stressful. I had a lot of long nights where I was just up researching, watching YouTube videos, trying to figure things out. But I knew, you know what, I'll do it. I'll figure it out. It's fine. If anything, I was just more excited to get there and kind of start the next stage of my life.
Yeah, obviously the process to move to Dubai, it's straightforward, simple if you do it correctly. Obviously you had me to help you, but for a lot of people, when I moved to Dubai, I had no one, so I had to do like hundreds of hours of research and everything like that. So obviously if you need help with that, you can reach out to my business partners. You can book a free consultation down below if you need help with that. If you don't want to do everything yourself, that option is open for you there. So outside of Dubai, obviously we're now here in Bali and we're sort of traveling around Asia together. What's your idea of the kind of life you want to live? Because for me, for example, I'm looking to have Dubai as my main base, my main residency for the foreseeable future, but I also want to spend time in other places. We're sort of exploring around right now. I think it's sort of similar to you. Is that sort of the idea for you? What's your idea for, like, do you want to have like one base? Do you want to have like a couple of different bases around the world? Like, what's your like lifestyle that you're now like sort of looking to live?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm still figuring that out, and that's part of this kind of little trip that we're doing. We'll split off and go to different places, but at least right now we're in Bali, and I want to explore a few different areas. I am really leaning towards Asia as a part of, as opposed to other parts of the world, and I just want to see what place I like living in. But for me, even just being in Bali this 1 month, what's really I've noticed is that I need a routine. I need to do something consistently. So I think longer term, at most having 2 different places that I'm staying in is probably what I'm looking for, because just traveling back and forth and going to so many different countries, you know, you're constantly getting set up again, you're going to a new gym, you're finding new restaurants, you're finding a new laundry place. I just don't think I could sustain that, especially when I get older. Right now it's fine, but I would like to have my primary place in Dubai, probably purchase a place there, maybe rent it out when I'm gone, and then spend the really hot summer months probably in Asia and in one location. Maybe I would go on vacation and go, you know, do some adventures in a few places, but I prefer to have kind of 2 longer term homes where I can have a routine in each, I can have everything set up, and I just only have to worry about logistics in 2 countries, not in like 7, 8, 9, 10, like we're kind of doing right now as we're traveling around.
Yeah, very similar idea to me. Like, explore around, see what we like, and then eventually determine like, okay, this and this place are the places where we want to spend time.
For sure, yeah.
Sure. Going back to sort of comparing life in Dubai, your sort of new life, and your old life in Canada, how would you characterize the sort of differences between living in Canada where you lived versus living in Dubai? Obviously very different places, but what would you say are some of the differences, perhaps differences that people might not expect or something like that?
Sure. So where I lived in Canada, just to give a bit of context here, was in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Most of you probably have no idea where that is. It's on the far east coast of Canada. There's like direct flights from there to London, for example. It's very sporadic weather there, where in one day you could have a temperature delta of 20 degrees Celsius. It's actually insanity. It could go from hailing to beautiful to snowing, and that really has an effect on your mental health and even just what you're able to do on a day-to-day basis. So the weather consistency in Dubai is super nice. It just fits in with that kind of routine and that pattern and lets you know, okay, I can wake up today and I can actually go outside, I can play tennis, you can plan your life a little bit easier. Beyond that, just the people. I lived in a pretty small area. Most of the friends that I had were a little bit older than me because I was kind of living in more of like a private community. And in Dubai, even I sit at a coffee shop and like I'm meeting entrepreneurs, I'm meeting really cool people. There's so many more networking opportunities, so many more things to do. In Canada, my life was like wake up, work out, work all day, watch Netflix, maybe go out once a week, maybe, probably not, maybe a few times a month, maybe go see my parents. It was really dull, kind of boring life. I didn't have anything to look forward to. What I looked forward to was like going on a trip to Dubai or going on a vacation somewhere else. Whereas now when I'm in Dubai, there's so many different things to do. And I find that life is just so much more exciting and bright and vibrant, and there's more activities that I can go do. With that, it's also very distracting living in Dubai. There's always something to do, which means that I get probably less work done in Dubai and I spend more money than I would have in Canada. So, you know, there's a balance and there's pros and cons, but overall, I just feel a lot happier. I feel more energetic. I'm looking forward more to life living in a place like Dubai, and I think the weather has a big impact on that too.
For sure, yeah. I think even the biggest, well, taxes is a really big thing. But just the weather, like seeing the sun every single day when you open the curtains, is like, it's been studied, like it has an effect on your testosterone or like your hormones, everything like this. It's a very, I think, underrated sort of quality of life improvement just to be in that sunshine all the time. 100%. Definitely feel that. So what about the cost? Well, Dubai has the perception that it's like mega expensive, and it obviously is. But how would you compare like general cost of living in Canada versus Dubai? Perhaps if you know about the cost of living in like a major Canadian city like Toronto, like what can you say about that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, if we want to compare to Toronto or Vancouver, those are some of the most expensive places in the world to live, currency adjusted, in like, because you make Canadian dollars, you're paying Canadian dollars. So if I'm telling you how much it costs, it's in Canadian dollars that I'm sharing with you. But to rent, for example, like a 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto is going to be like $2,500 a month for just an okay place. Like, you're not getting a luxury building, you're not getting the best view, you're on a low floor, it's probably out of date. You want a nicer place, you're talking $3,000, $3,500, $4,000 a month, and you're also paying 50% tax if you're in the highest tax bracket when you're living there. In terms of food, I'd say Dubai is definitely cheaper. Activities going to be similar in Dubai as it is to Canada, and overall I don't see a massive difference in the cost of living from Canada to Dubai. What I do notice is in Dubai I have the realm, or like I can spend money in any level, you know what I mean? I can spend a few dollars a day or I can spend $100,000 a day if I wanted to in Dubai. That's the difference. I have the ability to go do these crazy luxury things, which once in a while we'll go do, like rent a supercar or something. Whereas in Canada, you don't really have that choice. You're just stuck in this one income level where if you're poor, you're paying this amount. If you're rich, you're paying this amount. And it makes it really difficult for people that are really struggling to get by. What I noticed immediately in Dubai is that if you live a little bit outside of those major city centers, you can actually get really affordable places that are pretty decent. You're not going to live in crazy luxury condo buildings or be 2 minutes from Dubai Marina, but you still have access to a decent life. And I can't say the same about Canada. Even if you live super far out, it's still expensive, and you're not anywhere close to amenities. Like, we're talking hours away from a major city.
Is there anything yet you don't like about living in Dubai?
A few things. I would say the time zone is a little bit of an issue. A lot of times I'm working with people in Pacific time zone, and that's what, like an 11-hour, 12-hour time difference. So if you want to do a meeting, that can be really difficult to sync up and schedule, even if you're dealing with people in Eastern time zone or whatnot. Other things in Dubai, it can be a little superficial sometimes. You know, you see all the supercars, all the bling. It's distracting. You know, people are just spending so much money, and even if you're doing okay, you're constantly like, okay, I need to do better, I need to do better, I need to do better. That can be a pro, but I also find sometimes that can be a con, and it makes you look at life a little bit differently, right? You're kind of trapped in this bubble, this mega city, super rich, money everywhere, and I think it shifts your perspective a little bit on like the important things in life.
Sure, I think there's two sides to like the mega luxury of Dubai. Like on one hand, it can make you more materialistic, more focused on like, oh, I need the supercar, I need this and that, because that's what you see. But on the other hand, it will make you more motivated because you see the different levels of like what's possible and like what's out there, and it'll make you more motivated. I think it depends on the person. It depends on like, I don't know, sometimes Dubai makes me super motivated, but sometimes it also makes me think like, oh, like I don't want to see this because like I don't want to focus on this stuff. But there's definitely like two sides to this, in my opinion. Going back to Canada, so how much did you have to pay to leave Canada?
Oh man, you're gonna hurt me talking about this. So my approximate exit tax, which I'm still in the process of paying right now, is about $500,000 Canadian dollars. And I just want to preface this, like I don't have $5 million or $10 million. Like I had over $1 million when I left, but it's not like I'm this mega rich, crazy, like, you know, multi-millionaire guy. The reason I had to pay so much in taxes is because I'm a like business owner, right? Like a solopreneur. And because of that, when you own the shares of your own business, Canada is taxing them as if you're going to sell it when you leave. But I'm never going to sell that, right? My Tech with Tim YouTube channel doesn't really have value outside of me. But an auditor is still going to argue it has value because it makes money through sponsorships, through passive income sources like courses, etc. And also, I had to pay taxes on things like, like I had a bunch of stocks, for example, that I just have to sell because I have to move them over to UAE because I can't leave them in Canada. So I have to pay huge capital gains taxes on that, even though I might not have wanted to sell it. And I had to strip all the money out of my company. So usually what I would do is I'd take money from my operational company, put it in my holding company, and just leave it there, and I'll just take a little bit out when I need it. So I don't pay these huge marginal tax rates. But since I'm moving to UAE, I got to strip all the money out of these companies, which means I'm taking out, millions of dollars from this company, and I have to pay a huge flat tax on it when I just strip it out as a dividend or pay it as a salary or do, fancy accounting techniques. So that all added up to about $500,000, again, which I'm still in the process of paying right now.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And that's on the CRA valued. Yes. How did the valuation of your company who valued it? How did that happen? So it was valued at some X amount. That's like a theoretical value of your company, and you have to pay the tax on that, what you said, unrealized capital gain, even though you didn't necessarily have that value. Like you didn't actually sell your company. It didn't actually, like you couldn't actually sell it for that cash amount, but you still had to pay tax based on that value.
So it's very complicated. It's like you need an accountant to do this for you. So I'll explain it. I'll probably get a few things wrong, even though my accountant's told me 20 times. But the fact is that you have to value it at what an independent entity would value it at, like fair market value. So you can try to say, okay, because me, the CEO, whatever, is not involved, it's worth less, that's fine, but it still has intellectual property inside of the company, right? So for example, my YouTube channel, even if I stop posting, that still makes money. Courses that I have, even if I stop posting, that still makes money on a month-by-month basis. So you can still drop the value a little bit because your active income isn't something you would continue doing if you were to sell it, but you have to give it a fair valuation. So your accounting team or an independent auditor will come up with that valuation. It has to be reasonable, and that can always be challenged by CRA. The one nice thing you have in Canada is there is a lifetime capital gains exemption on the shares of one company that you own, or it could be multiple, but if you own a company and it meets all of these different criteria, you get a lifetime capital gains exemption of about $1 million, which means if you sell the shares of it, then you can get tax-free about $1 million. So that saved me a little bit on my primary company because that qualified under that, meaning I didn't have to pay tax on that, but I had other shares of other companies like my holding company, and the value exceeded that lifetime capital gain, so I had to pay a little bit extra. Very complicated. You're not going to understand it in me explaining it in 2 minutes. The fact is, if you are leaving Canada and you have even a little bit of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're going to get destroyed on taxes, especially if you own your own business. If it's all in like stock or it's all in savings or cash, it's not going to be that bad. It's more on the shares of your company and if you have to extract value out of the company.
What do you think Canada and these countries, especially in the West, want to make it so painful to leave?
Well, I mean, you know the answer to that. They don't want you to leave, right? Canada's even talking about now adding a flat tax, $25,000 for leaving. Just no matter what, you just have to pay that, even if you don't have a lot of assets. They're seeing all their most successful people make a little bit of money in Canada and then flee as fast as possible. Canada's having a crisis when it comes to wealthy people leaving the country. They're losing tax revenue. They're losing the people that contribute to business, less investments coming in. They're just completely destroying the country, bluntly. So they're trying to say, hey, if you're good, we need you here. We got to keep you here. We got to trap you as long as we can. That's what they're trying to do. They're never going to tell you that, but that is their goal.
It's sort of a vicious cycle. You get into the situation like all these people at the top who are actually paying all the taxes want to leave because of the taxes, and then they have no other choice but to, like, first of all, try to force them to stay there and or increase the taxes even more because they need them to pay more to compensate for this tax revenue that they're losing, which makes them want to leave even more. And then when you have the people that actually want to come to the country, that are sort of the people that are coming to the bottom, like from developing countries, like understandably they want to come to these countries to build a better life, but those people are not going to be the ones who are actually contributing to the tax base, at least in the beginning of their careers. So you have this very, very bad, vicious cycle that is going to be very difficult to get out of for Canada, UK, all these countries.
And who actually gets completely destroyed by this cycle is the people that are making a little bit of money, but aren't rich enough to reach that point where they could go set up in UAE. Yeah. They can afford to pay the exit tax and leave. Yeah. Like the people making 150 grand, 200 grand a year that are doing well in Canada, well compared to the average Canadian, not that well globally, they're the ones who are really paying the super high extra tax, because the people that are rich enough can just leave, right? If you have enough money, you can actually leave. But if you're still kind of paycheck to paycheck, you have a little bit of savings, maybe you have a house in Canada and you're just building your life up and you're making a good amount of money, you're the one who's really paying those super high tax brackets. And yeah, you're getting destroyed. Like the upper middle class, the middle class is just ruined in Canada. And unless you can really go beyond that and build some additional wealth, it's really hard to get out and to escape.
All of this said,
yeah.
Is there anything that you miss about living in Canada?
I definitely would say I miss my friends, I miss my family, kind of like the nature of Canada is something too. It's a really beautiful country and it's very diverse in terms of the things you can actually do. I really like fishing personally. I'm not really going to do that in UAE, right? In the desert, super hot, maybe in the ocean. But anyways, I miss that. And yeah, you know, I miss little things. Like I had my cat that I had to leave. I could have brought her, but it would have been way too complicated. I think just like that old lifestyle, reminiscing on maybe like simpler times. But overall, I wouldn't say that I would go back, right? It's just, you know, I lived in Canada my entire life, so I'm used to the nature, I'm used to that lifestyle. So it was an adjustment going to UAE, but overall, very, very happy with the decision, and I don't see myself returning anytime soon.
Let's imagine a world where Dubai and the UAE doesn't exist.
Yeah.
The rest of the world is exactly as it is, except Dubai and the UAE doesn't exist. Where do you think you would have still left? Number one, I assume. Number two, where do you think you would have moved if you had to decide right now? Yeah,
it's a good question. I did so much research on Dubai and UAE, it's hard for me to even imagine another place. I would say probably somewhere like Mexico or maybe even a Thailand, but they're less attractive. Mexico, because for Canadians, it's really easy to move there and you can do 6 months like tourist visa in Mexico. So you can technically like live in Mexico without doing the entire whole setup process, and you can still get rid of the Canadian tax residency. Very popular place for a lot of Canadians. I wouldn't move to the US. I don't know, it's too similar to Canada. Taxes are also high. Where else? I don't know, maybe somewhere in South America, but I haven't been to those countries, so I think I would have first had to probably fly there, try it out, see what it's like, or hopefully try to meet someone who lives there. Yeah, to have the confidence to kind of make that leap, because bluntly, you were one of the reasons why it was really easy for me to go to UAE, because I'm like, hey, he has the same business as me. If he can do it, I can do it, and it was kind of a role model and inspiration, right?
So with all that said, obviously for people like us, the great situation with what we do is that we're able to live where we want because we work online and things like this. What about for someone watching this video who perhaps is not in this situation? Is there any tips, sort of business, like a sort of career advice that you can give people in terms of what they could do to get into the same kind of lifestyle as us?
Yeah, I think the first thing is trying to live as frugally as possible. I mean, if you have enough money, really anything's possible. I hate to say that, but it's kind of true. If you have enough money, that really fixes almost any problem you have. So even if you don't have like a super high paying online job, but you have $3 million in the bank, okay, yeah, now you can escape, right? You can just go live off of that and start a new life in a new country. But for people that don't have that, I'd say trying to build something on the side. I mean, that's what I did, even though I started doing it really, really young. I was always working full-time jobs. I was working at McDonald's, I was working as a camp counselor. I was doing like full-time software engineering type jobs before I was able to build up this side income stream that eventually became my primary stream, and then I was able to quit all of those things. So I'd say continually kind of striving to do something on the side, setting up a little consulting business, maybe running a YouTube channel, doing some kind of content, just trying to work on something that's not dependent on someone else, right? I know it's really easy to say because we've done it and we were successful, and I know many people that do it won't be successful, but the truth is, like, you have to build something outside of just one single job, right? You're not going to be able to do this if you're tied down to a single employer, unless you have a really, really good job for a great company who's going to relocate you. But to relocate you to the UAE, I don't know, that's probably a pretty rare chance, right?
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you for coming on the channel.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you again, Tim, for coming onto the channel. I have left all his social, including both of his YouTube channels, as well as his Instagram down below in the description. And if you want to see another podcast just like this, where I interview 2 Dubai business setup experts, as well as my personal friends, about everything that you need to know about moving to Dubai, then you can watch this video right here. I think you will learn a lot from it. So click on that video now, and I will see you in the next one.
whoa. You can just cut that out, eh?
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I'm gonna leave it in.
Leave this whole part in, yeah.